Thank you. Now I'm going to please ask the current president of Selamat to come up and say a few words. Delano Saleh, please.
Distinguished guests, Consul General of Indonesia in Toronto, India Tekrit Bhaktia, Consul General of Sri Lanka in Toronto, Mohammed Jawhar, our keynote speaker, Saudara Nur Rahim, heads of and directors of our affiliate organizations, members of the Executive Council of Selamat, the organizing committee, members, friends, ladies and gentlemen. I am deeply grateful for your presence here today and sincerely hope that this will be the beginning of a new chapter helping to build closer ties between us and our Malay communities from Indonesia and Malaysia. I'd like to mention here that the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, the Honorable John McCallum, who was invited to this event, has sent in his regrets for not being able to attend due to prior, I would say, heavy commitments, and we hope to have him for a future major event, inshallah. Our event today is not aimed at presenting a formal forum, but is a reminiscence of our past and heritage, kind of reawakening, and which will be covered adequately by our keynote speaker, and I hope that our younger generation in particular will be made aware of the important contributions made by the Malays of Sri Lanka in the history of the country. I'd like to thank our organizing committee and the Exco of Selamat for the hard work and sacrifices made towards the success of this event. And I shall, without further ado, I shall end my address with Terima kasih, which means thank you in Malay.
Thank you, Delano. Now we're going to start our first presentation. It is called the Heritage of the Malays of Sri Lanka by Saudara Nur Rahim. So can I please ask you to come up? Thank you.
Ceramah hari ini adalah atas mengingatkan warisan bangga Melayu. In other words, what I'm going to talk to you about today is the reminiscence of our proud Malay community, and the period that I'm going to talk about is when the Malays came in large numbers to Sri Lanka as they were brought down by the Dutch armies. The aim or the tujuan or the aim of the exercise is to rekindle our memories, to resuscitate and reminisce all the good things that our ancestors brought along with them when they came to Sri Lanka, which is called Ceylon at that time during the Dutch. In doing so, we will cover areas like going through the traditions and customs that our ancestors brought along with them, or it's called Adat Istiara Ninomoyantika, to resuscitate our Malay language, which is fast dying out in Sri Lanka and become quite a mixed language, and to remind people of the traditional recreational activities that our ancestors brought along with them when they came down with the Dutch army. To start off with the introduction, I will trace a little bit of history about the Dutch and how they occupied Dutch East Indies, which is the old name for present Indonesia. The background information too will cover that part of it. And the third point I wish to cover is how our ancestors arrived and stayed back in Sri Lanka after the Dutch and the British left the island. In doing so, I also touch on the erosion of our ancestral language, the ethnicity of our Sri Lankan Malays, and I'll talk about the wedding customs of the Sri Lankan Malays, which too is now fast dying. Then I go through some of the activities, religious activities that our ancestors brought along with them, which is called a Panja ceremony, which too is no longer in existence, and touch on the recreational activities and pastimes of our ancestors. To start off with, to introduce you to the background information that I spoke to you about, the Indonesian archipelago was a Dutch colony since the 17th century and was called the Dutch East Indies. The Dutch VOC was the first to occupy the whole archipelago except for places like Maluku or Maluku Islands in Indonesia, which they captured later on, as we'll talk about later on. And under the VOC or the Warisan Oost-Indisch Company, which is under the control of the Dutch government in Netherlands, they created their head administrative body and the hub of all commerce in the town of Jakarta, which they called Batavia. Batavia is the Dutch name, the Latin name for Holland. And of course now Batavia is called Jakarta. Our ancestors, I remember my great-grandmother at 109, she used to always tell me that she came from Batavia. And she was very proud of it. Getting back to Batavia as a central hub, one is reminded that there are so many ethnic groups in Indonesia that over, I believe, over 250 ethnic groups and around about 600 languages and dialects spoken in the archipelago. So one must remember that when Jakarta or Batavia was made the central hub for all activities, all these different peoples of Indonesia or Dutch East Indies, they congregated in Batavia. And in doing so, they got into compounds of their own individual liking, almost like segregating themselves each, in the town of Batavia and also on the outskirts. And for purposes of communications, as I said, there are so many languages and dialects, they started mixing their own language and their own dialects. And they called it Melayu Pasar or Melayu Campuran, which is Bazaar Malay, in other words. In the 17th century, went back again to Indonesia. These are the ethnic groups that are in the country. If you notice the various islands and the various ethnic groups that are indicated on the diagram. This is what the archipelago looks like. It is 17,000. It has 17,500 islands, of which 6,000 are inhabited. It covers 741,000 square miles. And from end east to west, it is about 2,500 miles. This is a large picture of Indonesia. And if you look at the map, you see a place called Ambon, which is in the Maluku Islands, and that was where the best spices came from. And the aim of the Dutch was to capture all these places for their own commercial needs, to prop up their own economies back in their own homes. And thus, at that stage, on the 17th century, spices was a highly sought after commodity, just like what oil is at the present moment. Maluku Islands was occupied by the Portuguese, and the Portuguese were, of course, defeated by the Dutch, and the Dutch had reigned of the whole archipelago, except for a few spots in Sumatra which are held by the British. In the 17th century, again, way back, I go back to let me talk about how the name Indonesia came about. It was in the year 1850, a British person by the name of Logan, who coined the word Indonesia, which comes from the Greek word Indos for India and Nisos for island. It was a German geographer called Adolf Bastian who wrote a book called Indonesian in 1884, and in 1920 the nationalists in Indonesia adopted it for the name for their hoped new nation. And so later on in the 20th century that the name changed to Indonesia. Okay, going back to the 17th century, as I said, the spice route was very important to the Dutch, and they were eyeing to take over Sri Lanka. And at that moment, they got the opportunity because the king of Kandy, King Warisan II, invited the Dutch to come and get rid of all the Portuguese troops that were occupying the coastal region of Sri Lanka. And the Dutch took that opportunity, mustered troops from the local populace, which are Indonesian of various ethnic groups, and brought them down to Sri Lanka to get rid of the Portuguese. It was in the year 1640 that our Malay ancestors arrived in Sri Lanka to get rid of the Portuguese. In 1658, the Dutch administration in the Dutch East Indies, or Indonesia as it's called now, deemed that all the exiles from Indonesia would be sent to Sri Lanka, or Ceylon as it was called, and that included members of the royalty, leaders of political parties, and all the leaders who were troublesome to the Dutch regime in the archipelago. When our ancestors came to Sri Lanka, they brought their own religion, traditions and customs, the prowess at handicraft and culinary prowess, sports prowess, artistic talents, and the easygoing way of life. They were a fun-loving lot, and they were always doing fun things. They were called Java Menisu. In Sinhalese it means man from Java, or Java Manisa by the Tamils, which also means men from Java. It was not long before that they were recognized for the benefits to the country, and there are various places named after Javanese, which is a place called Java Lane. Just to name a few, there's a place called Ja-Ela, which is a town plus the name of the tributary from the Kelani Ganga, which flows past the Ja-Ela town. Then we have a place up north in Jaffna, which is called Java Kacheri, which was really Java Kacheri. And there was also talk to say that Jaffna was really Java Nagar, which means a province of Java. And there are several names pertaining to our heritage, our ancestors, which are too long to expand on. Places like Samanture, which is really Sampan Ture, which is, again, Sampan means boat and Ture means harbor. Hamban Ture is another good. Hamban Ture is again Sampan Ture, which is again city of boats. In addition to all the fun-loving things that they did, the Malays also built mosques wherever they were based in. The thing to note about the Dutch rule of Sri Lanka was the fact that they were only able to conquer the coastal areas. They could never conquer the heritage capital or the Candian kingdom. And wherever they got rid of the Portuguese, they ended up taking over the forts and fortresses that were built by the Portuguese and expanded it, made it more robust, made it more defensive. And that is where most of our Malay troops ended up, on the coast of Sri Lanka, at the forts that were built. Just to give you an idea of the number of forts that there were, you see all those places marked on that map, of which most of them are now derelict or damaged or totally destroyed. Only a few of them remain intact and are now a tourist attraction. So wherever they went, they built mosques for themselves. They were popularly called the Malay regiment, that were the armies that came to Sri Lanka. And this is a chronology of how they kept changing. In 1795, when the Dutch handed over the reins to the British. 5 companies of the soldiers that came along, which were our ancestors, were absorbed by the British Army because the British Army could not muster recruits from Malaya. They were only able to muster 6 recruits from Malaya to join the British forces in Sri Lanka. And furthermore, the 5 companies and all the Malays that came to Sri Lanka got stranded in Sri Lanka because the Dutch administration in the Dutch East Indies or Indonesia told the administration in Colombo, don't bring those guys back because it will be very troublesome for us because we don't know how they react when they come back. There could be a huge security problem. And that's how most of our Malays got stranded in Sri Lanka and made good. Because when they joined the British Army, they were well thought of. They were very brave soldiers and they were renowned for their bravery and sincerity and loyalty to the hierarchy. One thing of note is that they did so well that in 1802, the king in England, King George III, presented the Malay regiment with his first regimental colours. It was the first colonial army to receive such an accolade or honor from the king at that time. The regiment also fought 2 wars called the Canadian War of 1803. The Canadian War of 1803, they lost the battle and retreated. It was later on in after about 10 years, they were able to conquer the Canadian Kingdom. After having achieved that, the rule of the Canadian Kingdom, the British were able to rule the whole island altogether. And then they were confronted with a rebellion by the peasants in the Warisan rebellion of 1817-1818. This rebellion was because the British had promised the Buddhists to uphold and hold in high esteem the Buddhist religion. And the second reason why they fought the British was the fact that a Malay was appointed as Muhajirum, which in other words is like a headman or a bit higher than a headman status, to administer the area of Warisan, and the populace didn't like it. And we have Muhajirum Haji. Muhajirum Haji and his brother were appointed to fight and suppress the rebellion at that time, and they did so. And the person who led the war of Warisan was local called Kapitipula Disawa, and Kapitipula Disawa was a guy appointed by the British to go and suppress the rebellion. But instead of suppressing the rebellion, he went across and joined the rebellion as a leader. And then the Malay troops were sent by the British to get rid of Kapitipula and the rebellious followers. Kapitipula was, of course, captured and he was executed by the British. The second rebellion was called the Matale Rebellion of 1848. And this rebellion was indeed had nothing to do with religion or the Malay Muhajirum. This was to get rid of colonialism. It was led by a local by the name of Puranatu and another leader who was called Goda Banda. Puranapu was executed, he was arrested and tried and executed by the British. And Goda Banda too was tried for treason. Instead of executing him, they flogged him, they whipped him 100 times and deported him to Malacca in Melayu. Now these are some of the forts that are still remaining in Sri Lanka. This is the entrance to the Nigambo prison. Only the entrance and a few dilapidated walls are left, still intact. And if someone goes to the Katanayake airport, you can go drive from Nigambo and you'll see it. This is a picture of what the fort was in Colombo. Is no longer in existence. And the picture at the bottom is that of Fort Frederick, which is still intact and in pristine condition. And it's a tourist spot, and it also has a place of worship for the Hindu religious gods. Then we have the famous fort in Galle, which is a tourist attraction. Then we have a fort in Matara, which is called the Star Fort, which is also still in good condition. Next I'm going to talk to you about the mosques that our ancestors built. The famous mosque, which stands as a sentinel and also as a good memory to our ancestors, the one at Yavalian, which are built with the soldiers' pension fund, part of the pension fund, and also the soldiers contributed a rupee each for the construction of the mosque. At one time, they called it the Javalian Mosque, but the real designation is Masjidul Jamia Malay Military Mosque. It still stands as a sentinel because the land around it, all the houses, which are predominantly Malay community right around, it's a bustling Malay community. They did a lot of businesses and they were famous for selling food, Malay culinary type of food. The mosque stands as a sentinel to Malay regiment and it was part of the garrison. The garrison is no longer in existence, which is just adjoining the mosque. I show you some of the pictures about the mosque. This is the mosque life, and if you notice the number of houses around it, it are all built up. This is what it looks on the front. The entrance to the mosque, right at top with the writing which still exists, which is the original writing on top of the mosque on the arch. The entrance, what it looks like inside, and this is, I don't know whether you can see it. That's where the mosque lies. And can you see all these houses? They've all been demolished for economic and development requirements by the government. About 2 years ago, they were all demolished. There's a huge concentration of Malays in that area. Of course, most of them were from the poorer class, but nonetheless they were a happy-go-lucky type of people. I know it because I lived in that area for almost 60 years of my life. And I mingled with them. And they're nice people, they're very, very sincere to you, but they're not rich. They're rich in heart.